Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive with me? Today we're tackling something that might seem super basic at first, but trust me, it's a game changer when it comes to feeling more confident speaking English.
I think a lot of people underestimate how important it is. Being able to talk about your daily routine smoothly.
Exactly. And we've got a really cool podcast episode we're using as our source material today. It's aimed at English language learners, and they break it down in such a fun and practical way. They start by saying, everyone's got a routine, right? Even if you think yours is totally boring.
Yeah, I like that they acknowledge that right off the bat.
Like they use the example of hitting the snooze button 10 times before actually getting out of bed.
Which, let's be honest, who hasn't done that at some point, right?
Exactly. It's something everyone can relate to.
And that's what makes it such a good conversation starter. It's like instant common ground.
So true. Okay, so the podcast goes through different parts of the day, starting with the morning routine. And of course, you've got your basic verbs. Waking up, getting out of bed.
Oh, they even make this funny point about how those are two separate things, waking up and getting out of bed.
Right, like mentally, we all know there's a difference there. Sometimes a big difference.
Totally. It's that in-between stage where you're like half awake, half asleep, debating whether to hit snooze one more time.
The struggle is real. The podcast even has a dialogue example about that where one person's like, should I hit snooze or just cry?
Yeah. They use a lot of those little dialogue snippets to show you how these words would actually come up in a conversation.
Which is super helpful because, it's one thing to memorize a word from a list, but it's another to actually hear it used naturally.
Absolutely. So after the morning routine, they move on to the work or school day.
Right, and they introduce the word commute. Always a fun one, right?
Well, they actually poke fun at it. Like they call it the time you spend wondering where your life went wrong.
I mean, some days that's pretty accurate.
But they do balance it out by talking about, the good parts of the workday too, like lunch break, which they describe as the highlight of the day.
Hey, for some people it really is, but then you get back to work. More emails, more meetings.
Yeah, they have a dialogue bit where the person is just listing off their tasks, and it's basically check emails, go to meetings, check more emails.
Super relatable. It's like, can't we all just hit the pause button on the workday sometimes? But I guess that's where the evening routine comes in.
Right, that's the wind down time. And they cover things like cooking dinner, or, in their words, ordering takeout, because who has the energy to cook after a long day?
Again, so relatable. And then, it's the classic evening activity, watching TV.
Or, as they put it, becoming one with the couch while Netflix asks, are you still watching?
Oh, that's so good. They actually have a dialogue example where one person admits to always saying yes to Netflix, even if they've totally fallen asleep.
It's those little details, that make the language come alive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things this podcast does so well.
Totally agree. They managed to make learning about daily routines, which could be super dry, actually pretty entertaining.
And engaging. It's like by using humor and these relatable scenarios, they're making it easier for you to actually remember the vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah, I'm definitely picking up some new phrases and expressions here.
Me too. And speaking of expressions, they also introduce some idioms related to routines, which I think we should get into. But first, how about a quick break?
All right, sounds good. We'll be back in a jiffy to unlock some more English language secrets.
And we're back. I was just thinking about how much I like the way this podcast approaches idioms.
Oh, yeah, they definitely don't shy away from them.
But they always explain them so clearly,
Exactly. It's not like they just throw them in there and expect you to figure it out.
Like one of the idioms they talk about is rise and shine, which of course means to wake up.
Yeah, that's a pretty classic one.
But they make it funny by showing like how someone might say it to themselves sarcastically while hitting the snooze button.
Haha, yeah, rise and shine. Or maybe just 5 more minutes.
Exactly. It's like they get the struggle.
All right, what other idioms did they cover?
Well, they talked about burning the midnight oil.
Ah, that's a good one. To stay up late working or studying.
Yep. They even have this example where someone's like totally exhausted after a night of burning the midnight oil to finish a project.
I feel seen. Okay, was there another one?
The last one they mentioned was call it a day.
Oh, yeah, I use that one all the time. Just means to finish working for the day.
Right, like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to call it a day. Simple, but useful.
Totally. I actually feel like I have a much better grasp of those idioms now.
Me too. And it's funny because they also had this whole section on common mistakes that English learners make.
Like what?
Well, one thing they pointed out was using the wrong tense when talking about routines.
Ah, Yeah, it's easy to slip up and use the present continuous instead of the simple present.
Right. Like you wouldn't say, I am waking up at 7 a.m. every day. You'd say, I wake up at 7 a.m.
Okay, that makes sense. Any other common errors?
They also mentioned the danger of direct translation.
Ooh, yeah, that can get you into trouble.
Like, sometimes learners try to translate word for word from their native language, and it just doesn't quite work in English.
Right, the sentence structure might be different, or the idiom might not exist in English.
Exactly. So their advice was to try to think in English as much as possible when you're talking about your routine.
Yeah, like don't translate it in your head, just go straight for the English words.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Okay, any other advice they offered?
One last thing. They emphasize the importance of being specific when you're describing your routine.
Oh, right. So instead of just saying, I eat breakfast, I should say something like, I have a bowl of cereal with fruit and yogurt every morning.
Exactly. It paints a clearer picture, and it gives you a chance to use more vocabulary.
Plus, it makes the conversation more interesting. Like, no one really wants to hear you just list off a bunch of generic activities.
Right. It's about bringing your routine to life with language.
I love that.
And, speaking of bringing things to life, I think it's important to remember that talking about your routine isn't just about practicing English.
It's about connecting with people, right?
Exactly. It's about sharing those little everyday moments that make us human.
Like, even though our routines might seem ordinary on the surface,
There's always something unique and interesting to be found if you look closely enough.
it's all about perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the beauty of language is that it allows us to share those perspectives with each other.
And create connections across cultures and backgrounds.
Right? Like think about it, even if you're talking to someone who lives on the other side of the world.
Chances are you both wake up, brush your teeth, eat breakfast, all those basic things that we all have in common.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it that way. Like our routines are both personal and universal.
Exactly. And by talking about them in English, you're not just improving your language skill. You're also creating a bridge to other cultures and sharing a little bit of yourself in the process.
Which, at the end of the day, is what communication is all about.
That's a great way to put it.
So, to all our listeners out there who are learning English,
Don't underestimate the power of your daily routine.
embrace it, explore it, and use it as a springboard for meaningful conversations.
You might be surprised at how much you learn both about the language and about yourself.
I think what's really cool about this whole idea of using your daily routine to learn English is that it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, it's not like you have to come up with some grand topic or like memorize a bunch of fancy vocabulary words.
Right. You can literally just talk about what you did that day. Woke up, had coffee, went to work.
Fought with the printer, ate lunch at my desk.
Exactly. It's all material.
And the more you practice talking about these everyday things in English,
The more natural and fluent you'll become. It's like you're building those language muscles without even realizing it.
yeah, and it makes it less intimidating,
Yeah, totally. Because everyone has a routine. It's something we all have in common.
And even if you think your routine is boring,
I bet you could find a way to make it interesting if you really thought about it.
like think about all the little details that make up your day, the things that make it unique to you.
Right. Maybe you have this special way of making your coffee in the morning.
Or you always listen to the same podcast on your commute.
Or maybe you have a funny ritual you do before you go to bed.
It's those little things, that make your routine worth talking about.
And who knows? Maybe by sharing those little things with someone else.
Yeah, you'll discover you have more in common than you thought.
Absolutely. It's all about making those connections.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. It's been a really interesting deep dive,
I feel like I've learned a ton, not just about how to talk about my daily routine.
but also about the power of finding those connections between language and everyday life.
And remember, everyone, even if you think your routine is boring,
There's always something interesting to be found in the ordinary if you look closely enough.
so go out there, practice your English, and don't be afraid to share those little moments that make up your day.
Happy learning.
And thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.